Hi there. Okay, so I'm back. So this is what we're going to be covering here briefly. I just need to make it very clear to you that my granddaughter is watching TV. She's awake, but I do need to get this done. I had some issues in regards to some possible ability to have some time to just work on my own here, but I am going to be going through a reading taken from this textbook here. It's called Native Nations of North America. It's the first chapter in the book, and it covers some pretty interesting material. There is a hidden history, a hidden heritage that this course attempts to try to unveil. This chapter is called The Indigenous Contribution and Perspective. The chapter covers population and language, food production, agriculture, medicine, other contributions, the hidden heritage, which is a big part. I'm going to do this in two parts. I'm going to do part 1, and then I'm going to do part 2. And there's a piece within the actual book that I want to pull out, the hidden heritage piece, and I want to devote a considerable amount of time just to that part. The rest of it I'm going to kind of jump into in this lecture here and walk you through that. And then it kind of goes into talking about ecology, ecologists being the indigenous peoples. And from watching the videos on Ways of Knowing and Being, I hope that now is kind of coming together. When we talk about this heritage, the history really extends back, right back from creation to creation, immemorial, as people like to say. Very vibrant communities existed here, structured societies that were all based on the Creator's law, the laws that He had in place in order for us to be able to live very productive and good and worthy lives. Had our own understandings that kind of the laws themselves drove how our protocols came to be. Our values were driven by a lot of these teachings. And this whole spirit and intent of the treaties, as we're going to get into that section, and you start to do your reading, you're going to see it goes back to that very same message as well. And so we really need to recognize that all of these parts, we really need to have a good understanding of this heritage that I'm going to keep drawing your attention to. So let's just jump into the reading. It is called Indigenous Contribution and Perspective, and it really starts to get into the cultural heritage as the reading starts. So I'm looking at page 2 of the reading. The reading draws our attention to the beginning of it, to this idea of nation. Natio, a Latin word more than 2,000 years old, originally meant family, language, customs, and beliefs of a people. The term, once colonization really took off in the later parts of our history globally, we see that the term later really referenced populations of territories, states, individual nationalities, and eventually what we see around us today, modern nation states. So I kind of have some problems with the term nation myself. I prefer to use the word people. But we'll kind of get into that, and I'll kind of continue to massage that, if you will, so that you'll maybe leave the course maybe not in agreement with me, but understanding my perspective and where my concerns are. So on page 3 kind of jumps into it. Now I'm screen sharing here. I got some emails from some of the individuals starting to send in their proposals. Chelsea sent it in as an attachment. If we go back to our syllabus, that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing, right? Anything that you're sending in to me, it has to be submitted via UR courses. It kind of goes through this, excuse me here, instructions for reflection submissions. This also applies to the proposal. I guess I should make that a little clearer in the syllabus. So this is here, the instructions. Please reference them, page 4. It just makes my job easier when I'm trying to go through everything and organizing things. It tells you exactly how to submit things. So please do that for the proposal. As I indicated in both the email I sent out earlier today and in the video that I'm going to be, it's already been created. just around the assessment process for the course. I've also spoken to that as well. So you don't need to put this proposal in APA formatting, all right? You need to just get it in. A one page, making sure you cover the areas that are identified here, all right? Intends to address or review what your peoples are you're going to be researching, a review of the resources you've actually already reviewed prior to submitting your proposal. That just demonstrates to me you're engaged in the process of research now. And of course, the learning outcomes, what you're teaching your peers, at least 3. That could be a 1-pager, it could be a 2-pager. Don't get too concerned about any formatting specifically for that. The rest of the pages, when we talk about APA formatting for the course, that is specific to your reflections that you'll be submitting to me, okay? And so now when we start to get into looking at the actual lecture for today, here we have it here. And it begins looking at before 1492. Estimates of the number of peoples indigenous to the Americas before 1492 range as high as 112 million. So that at that time would be about 1/5 of the world's human population at that time. So what really happened after that, of course, is a real destruction to the peoples themselves. An incredible genocide occurred here, probably the largest Holocaust that you really have witnessed really occurred after 1492, both in South, Central, and North America. So that's kind of referenced to a bit as well in this reading. So let's go to page 3 of the reading. Linguists, estimate 56 separate language families for the native peoples of the Americas, a fact attesting to their long occupancy and complex relationships in this hemisphere that existed here. There are as many as 1,700 to 2,000 indigenous languages, many with complex grammars and vocabularies containing up to 20,000 words. In Mexico alone, there are 33 principal Indian languages still spoken, as little related to each other as are Finnish, Chinese, and Hebrew. It's estimated that there are more than 30 million indigenous Americans in North, Central, and South America who speak one of the hundreds of still existent indigenous languages, Indian languages, while perhaps as many as 100 million people possess some degree of indigenous ancestry. Just to keep you some context. It does kind of go through population and language on page 3, first column, going into the second column. That I'll leave for you to review, all right? When we start to get into the numbers, we start to see that's kind of goes through on the bottom of the second column on page 3. On top of page 4, first column, it deals a lot with that as well. Before the European conquest, as the author calls it, the Americas were populated by thousands of different native communities and nations, organized from the smallest socio-political unit, such as the family, commune, or band, to the largest, such as urban civilizations of Aztec, Maya, and Inca, which numbered tens of millions of people. So despite the very huge decline due principally to this invasion that occurred, a standard estimate for the current American Indian population in 10 or more million living in what is now Mexico, another 10 million at least in Central America, millions more in Peru, 3 million in Chiapas and Colombia and Panama. So yeah, for years, anthropologists estimated that before the European invasion in the 15th and 16th centuries, there were less than 1 million so-called American Indians living north of the Rio Grande in the United States and Canada. But recent scientific estimates have pushed that number up to 7 or more million. So that's very important for you to understand as well, all right? The entry of Europeans into so-called New World after 1492 led to the rapid collapse and decline of indigenous populations, This resultant genocide became the American Holocaust. The population decline in Central and South America totals tens of millions. The native population of the United States, Canada, and Greenland combined reached perhaps 375,000 by 1900, okay, AD, current era. So that was a huge drop. That's why it's called the Holocaust. So, but you know, we can still see that the actual impact, the heritage still exists, even though this is what happened. And on page 4, second column, you start to see this being reflected in some of the language around the care of the land. Every reason to believe that the population was maintaining the maximum population consonant with the state of development of Indian agriculture and industry. In North America, there was no free land, in spite of the European view to the contrary. From the European perspective, there was plenty of room, because with European agricultural methods, the Americas, particularly in the temperate zone, could be made to support a greater population. And we can see that today. It's considered the most transformed region on Earth, the Great Plains of North America. It's today called North America. It's the most transformed region on Earth. It's become just one big farm area. You were hard-pressed to even find a real grassland, prairie grassland in its authentic form anymore. It's all been very much impacted by colonization. So when we start to take a look at some of these, you know, we really need to recognize that there has been a huge contribution of indigenous peoples to the world. Native Americans over the centuries developed 18 plants, but few draft animals. And that really is reflective that we didn't have cows to pull our equipment. We didn't use, except, you know, there were sled dogs. There were also some in South America that were used for helping. But primarily draft animals, animals that were used to work. It just went against the indigenous philosophies that existed here. Corn, cotton, tobacco, potatoes, peanuts, sweet potatoes, pumpkins, squash, beans, artichokes, sunflower seeds, cranberries. Almost half of the world's usable foods actually came from the Americas. 60% of crops grown today globally came from here. So when you start talking about what you're having for supper, keep that in mind, that if it's an Italian sauce, you probably are going back to your hidden heritage of what was actually here prior to contact and what was already being grown here. And when we start to get into page 5, it talks about the medicines. More than half of the medicines found in modern pharmacies, such as aspirin, are from this region of the world, because there was such an intricate observation through thousands of years of all these plants. They gained an incredible depth, wealth, if I can use that word, of knowledge about different plants, their uses, what they could be used for. And a lot of that the teachings came from watching the animals, what the animals ate. And just watching the animals could see certain plants, not all the time, but that was a part of the universe, that the university, as I said in the last final lecture I gave on ways of knowing and being. So more than half of the medicines that we have in our medicine boxes, all right, this is a very much because of what was in place here and the practices that existed here. Skilled practice. And Europeans, when they first arrived, widely acknowledged the overall excellent health of native people. And that is very much the truth. We'll start to get into it. Oh, and I should mention, indigenous medical knowledge represented not only a lot of the drugs, but there was treatments for childbirth, problems, fractures, dislocations, surgery techniques, psychosomatic techniques in ceremony. There was a lot of very, very sophisticated processes and practices that existed here for medicine. Other contributions on page 5, second column, we get to tobacco. Tobacco circled the world in less than 2 centuries and was reinforced by the Russians into Alaska. Reintroduced, pardon me. Originally, it was introduced into Europe by Spain in 1558 and then into England in 1586, about 30 years later. Tobacco became immensely important to the colonies and was indirectly responsible for the eventual dispossession of the 5 civilized tribes in Georgia and other southern states. Today, tobacco is one of the most valued cash crops grown in the United States. Tobacco originally was very spiritually used and sparingly in indigenous ceremonies and was in its pure form. I don't know what if you smoke cigarettes, but I once heard somebody tell me there's about 200 ingredients in some of the tobaccos that are on the shelves these days. That's crazy. So anyway, as far as we know, there was no cancer that existed at the time, even though we had it. We were the ones who cultivated it here, all right? Cotton was known in the Old World, but is also grown in the Americas. Some was originally grown in the Southwest, but mostly it was not grown in North America. Corn and tobacco were at first important to the colonies for 2 centuries. Cotton, on the other hand, was shipped to England until the late 18th century. Invention of the cotton gin in 1793 led to its economic importance in the southern United States. The value of Indian lands in the South and the forced dispossession of the Indians from these lands under the 1830s Indian Removal Acts, that's what the act of the United States, what they legislated to remove all the Indians in the South and just move them. The Trail of Tears always comes from a lot of this stuff. Due in large part to the increasing value to Anglo-Americans of cash crops like cotton and tobacco. Indigenous societies, okay, I'm just going to quickly go here. Respected the environment by living in harmony with nature, and we talked about that in our last lecture on Indigenous ways of knowing and being. To do otherwise would be to destroy the food sources for societies that were hunters and gatherers or horticulturalists. The land ethic of stewardship was reinforced by Indian spirituality. Supernatural powers governed the natural world and formed a link between mankind and all things both animate and inanimate in what we understand within the Western paradigm. The Indian had a respect bordering on awe for everything he could see, hear, or touch. The earth was the mother of life, and each animal, each tree, each living thing was locked into an interrelated web of spiritual existence of which the individual was a small part. A view that contrasted very sharply to that of the land-hungry European immigrants who saw themselves as mastering nature. So we get on to page 6 and 7. Rubber was another Native American contribution. Balls, all the tubes, enema tubes, syringes, waterproof clothing, they're all made from rubber. All right, and that was something that was already being used here. Various forms of native housing influenced early European settlements. Adobe pebble construction, the bark of thatch-covered wigwams, the palisaded Indian villages. The latter became a defense against attack for eastern forts. The log cabin, on the other hand, was of Scandinavian origin. The hammock used by Amazonian Indians was adopted by navies all over the world. They were infinitely better than the fixed bunks when at sea. The parka, the poncho, moccasins, textile fibers, cotton, and sisal were also borrowed from the American Indians. Tailored clothing made of skins, textiles, cotton, for instance, and the use of an outer robe of unshaped animal hide, whether it was buffalo, deer, or moose, were all borrowed from Native Americans. One type of Indian clothing used extensively in North America was that of the frontiersmen, the deerskin outfit consisting of a shirt, leggings, moccasins, and the beach cloth. You've probably seen them in pictures. They were taken over by early settlers or borders of the trans-Allegheny frontier. People, you may have heard of Daniel Boone. He was one of the ones who dressed like that. All right, so it was adapted into the styles of clothing. American revolutionists took over the Indian method of fighting from ambush and camouflage. British generals bitterly complained initially that the Americans the Americans, did not fight fair when they hid behind stone fences and trees and fired at the exposed redcoats marching in ranks along open roads. Most importantly, the example of Eastern Indians, particularly the powerful Six-Nation Haudenosaunee Iroquois, to form the political confederations, was not lost upon the U.S. founding fathers in their efforts to craft a republic. And we're going to talk about that in, coming up here. We are looking at Module 1, Topic 3 and 4. We'll get into that, okay, so next week. And so it kind of talks about that, and it gets into talking about trade as well. It does kind of reference some of the other contributions, the gold that was melted down for bullion, and the author says that this melting down of all this incredible, beautiful gold jewelry and everything, artwork, really helped to finance the birth of the Industrial Revolution in Europe. Interesting. Indian weaving, some of the finest in the world, also mentioned. Talks a little bit about some of the standards of trade here on slide slide we're on right now. We can see that it's carried on by barter. Standards include shells, that's the exchange shells, animal pelts. Early settlers, they actually used some of these standards of value and established here and frequently incorporated them as part of their own economies. Beaver pelts, interestingly, remained the standard of value in North America until the mid-19th century, when the beaver was all but exterminated. And that's another common theme. We really start to realize that there was a lot of creatures that were exterminated through the process of occupation that occurred here. Sad but true. Okay, and it talks about some of the other actual standards. In the southeast was deerskin, Pacific coast, sea otter, pelts. Plains, of course, the buffalo hide. And this is where I'm going to jump off from here. I want to do these slides in the next actual PowerPoint. I think I'm going to stop here for now. My granddaughter's kind of been walking in here too, so I think she's kind of ready to do something with me too. So I got up to page 7, and we're going to be doing page 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 in the next video. It will probably be about similar in length. So given that I've already given you, I think, 2 about 20-minute videos today, we are, I think, sitting okay for lecture, in terms of lecture length for today. I do expect you to be doing your readings. Please ensure that you're starting on Treaty Elders of Saskatchewan book, and we have a quiz next Monday. And with that, I guess I'm going to say goodbye because this girl's trying to come bug me. Okay, so you'll see me soon.